The 9/11 memorial is open and to the public within hours. But the fact of the matter is, 13 years now after the horror of 9/11, think about it. Terror alive and well. Al-Qaeda rocking and rolling. Bad guys the world over dominating the headlines the world over. Have we forgotten what happened that day? And are they merely museum reminders this day? Tonight, with all the cross currents of market activity, I thought it might be a good time to stop, reflect, remember. There are a lot more important things than your money. 13 years ago, a lot more priceless things. Welcome, everybody. I'm very glad to have you with us. I'm Neil Cavuto. To a man who was one of those speakers today and was there then on what we might be forgetting now, the former governor of the fine state of New York, George Pataki. Governor, good to have you. Very moving comments today.
Thank you, Neil.
And I was thinking, as I was hearing from prominent Democrats and Republicans, victims, families, rescuers that day, those who survived that day, it seems like a lot of us have forgotten the evil that was that day.
You know, part of the purpose of the museum is to tell people what happened that day, including the evil, and to do it in a way that people who not only were not there but weren't even born on September 11th understand the magnitude and the horror of that attack. And I think it serves that purpose. But it's one thing for the people to remember. It's another thing for our leadership to react and act appropriately. And I fear in this case the American people understand. We are at risk again. Al-Qaeda is way too active. Other terrorist groups are way too active. We need an American government that understands that this is a serious threat.
So what do you say to those who say, well, we did go after Al-Qaeda. It's not like going after a single country. They're all over the place. We've stepped up our vigilant anti-terror efforts. We spend a whole bunch of money on the military. We're still pricing it in for defense as if we're at the top of our spending in Afghanistan and Iraq. We have to dial back. You say what?
Neil, it's not just about military action. It's about diplomatic initiatives. And look at Egypt. Egypt is something where an ally of ours ended up in jail, and the Muslim Brotherhood came to power. But then, without our assistance, in fact, with our opposition, the Egyptians took control of that country and put back in place a regime and isolated and is now prosecuting members of the Islamic Brotherhood. Things like that across the
Doesn't that remind you that maybe we should not take sides in these battles overseas? Well, because you never know whose side you're on or who's zooming whom.
Well, the problem is we have not been loyal and supportive to our friends. Countries that have supported us in the war against terror and in the broader global struggles feel isolated, feel left out because we haven't supported them. Saudi Arabia is now talking regularly with China. They used to be a very dependable partner for the United States. So what we need is diplomatic initiative, letting countries that are friendly know that we will stand with them, knowing countries that don't stand with us know that they will face significant, not just economic sanctions, but isolation from the civilized part of the world. And look what's happening in Iran. They're getting closer and closer to nuclear weapons. The embargo that was working so well and creating enormous stresses in the Iranian economy and for the Iranian government now has massive holes because
and they're cloning our drones.
And they're cloning our drones because of the wrong type of diplomatic initiative.
Well, let's step back from this, and Governor, if I can bring my panelists in, John Layfield in Bermuda and Mattie Duppler here and Tracy Burns. Tracy, beginning with you on this notion that in the 13 years since then, we were the epicenter of the world's attention, quite rightly so. But the world had a commanding respect, and our enemies a real fear of us, too. Now, under Republican and Democratic presidents alike, we've piled on the debt. We've seen our top credit rating slide. So we're not feared as much anymore. And I'm wondering whether that's playing into this idea that the world doesn't see us the same way they did 13 years ago.
And then I think you don't see the event as severe as it was. If the people above do not make it out to be the awful, awful event that it was. Why would the kids growing up who weren't even alive believe that? It's all how you sell it to them. We have to remind them what happened over and over and over again. Much like we studied the wars in school, we have to study this, and these kids have to understand it. And we need the backing of an administration to prove that this was a serious issue. Don't blow this out. I mean, don't move on to minimum wage and forget that there are people out there that hate us. That's the message they're sending to our kids.
But, you know, Mattie, we're going to get into this a little more in the next second about, you know, young people today are just losing their faith in the markets and institutions. But a lot of it actually goes back to that day as well, and just sort of losing their faith in the world. Right?
Yeah, and to say that the world doesn't see us the same way isn't the same to say that the ourselves the same way, and I think a lot has changed, especially for people who were younger or kids who maybe have been in elementary school when this happened. They don't necessarily remember what the significance of the event was, but they're dealing now with the repercussions of that. They're dealing with a different world, and the question that they're trying to answer is, what does that world look like? Does it look the same in the future for me, or am I learning lessons as we're going along that say the world is going to be a different place forever, and I need to learn how to deal with that?
You know, you hit on a good point, and John Layfield, one I want to expand on, one that the governor raised, and that is this notion here that we're not as focused on evil and terror. It just is not as a top-of-mind concern. It was certainly a top-of-mind concern in September 2001. I guess what I'm saying, do we need an incident? Do we need a horrendous disaster to jar us back? Because I do remember that at the time, no one really cared that the markets were free-falling when they finally opened 6 days later. Everyone was really more concerned about, will they find bodies? Will they recover victims? I just think that we're one disaster away from experiencing it all over again, but because we haven't, certainly of that magnitude, we forget.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. I certainly hope that that event doesn't happen. We were part of one of the first, if not the first, entertainers, non-civilians with WWE to go down to ground zero while there were bodies that were still being pulled out of that rubble. To see these firefighters and these heroes that they looked soulless. They had worked for days without any sleep. The country was one at that point, and I've been to Iraq since then 8 different times, and I've seen the support start to drop, and I don't think that that's right. We have such mixed up politics in Washington, D.C. right now that people become disenfranchised, but we become disenfranchised over the wrong things. We still have a huge terror threat, as the governor just alluded to, and it's something that we have to deal with.
We're not dealing with the governor, to your point.
We're not dealing with it, and I don't mean to sound like a Republican, but we had an incident, Benghazi, which was a horrible terrorist attack, and instead of this administration saying, yes, we face this risk and we're going to proactively look to protect ourselves, they blamed it on us, on a video. That was not the case. And so what you were saying is absolutely right. The memorial serves a critical purpose. People, kids who go through that are going to sense the magnitude of the loss and the fact that it was a terrorist attack. But when you have an administration that downplays terrible regimes, now we're negotiating with Syria.
Well, there is all of this collectivism view that we are not the leader of the world. We are just a citizen, a co-player in the world, and it's kind of ingrained in our culture now. It's not,
well, it's ingrained in our political culture among certain people in Washington, but I still think the American people believe that this is an exceptional country. We believe in American exceptionalism.
Governor, thank you. Panel, thank you very much. And again, I did not mean, folks, to start the show off on a down note, but with the museum's opening today, it sort of did jar you back to the things that were so important back then. And for love or money, I don't remember anyone back then worrying about their investments. Not at one.